Hola, estamos de regreso acá en ExpoVid 2023. Muchísimas gracias a las personas que nos están acompañando en estas conferencias. Como saben, este año estamos conmemorando la pandemia y lo que hicimos y lo que vivimos y lo que todos sufrimos. Por eso acá estamos en casa, en el calor del hogar, transmitiendo en vivo, pero mañana vamos a estar después de muchos años en el auditorio EMU en AFZ, el American Free Zone, en un espacio presencial con conferencias, con música en vivo y por supuesto los Beat Awards. Así que ojalá podamos verlos allá en el evento. Y a quienes no nos van a poder acompañar presencial, recuerden que mañana a partir de las 6:30 p.m. los Beat Awards se van a transmitir también en vivo. Agradecemos muchísimo a la Universidad Creativa, nuestro sponsor Gold, que ha hecho posible los Beat Awards este año, a nuestro media partner, Pinto con Videojuegos, por siempre estarnos acompañando. Recuerden que esta transmisión también la pueden seguir en vivo en el YouTube de Pinto con Videojuegos. Síganos en nuestras redes, aquí abajito las tienen. En Facebook nos encuentran con el handle @expovid, en Twitter o X ahora nos encuentran como ExpoVidCR. También en nuestras redes sociales van a encontrar el enlace a nuestra comunidad de Discord. Así que ojalá se puedan unir para continuar la conversación. Y ayúdennos a compartir estos videos, ayúdennos a compartir estas conferencias para llegarle a más personas, compartiéndola en sus redes sociales, utilizando los hashtags ExpoVid, ExpoVid23, ExpoVid 2023. Gracias a la Universidad Creativa por hacer posible este evento y vamos sin más entonces a presentarles a nuestro siguiente charlista, a nuestro buen amigo Joseph, o mejor conocido como Joy, quien representa al estudio Blackberry King, un estudio que él mismo fundó y él, como dice su charla, va a compartirles palabras de sabiduría de un desarrollador independiente que se hizo a sí mismo, atendiendo eventos y desarrollando su comunidad hasta hacer de su emprendimiento algo sustentable. Recuerden, esta conferencia va a estar en inglés, así que Joy, welcome, how you doing?
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm sorry I don't speak Spanish.
No worries. It's not the first and not the last conference to go in English. And it's the video game development industry. Pretty much everyone that gets involved in this industry talks at least a little bit of English, so no one's going to get lost. So no problem
Absolutely.
there. Welcome to Expo Vid 2023. And we're super glad to have you here to share your words of wisdom. So, without further ado, I'll leave you guys with Joy. So, take it away.
Awesome. All right, let me get my presentation up. One second. All right. Okay, everybody. Well, it's nice to be here. My name is Joey. You can also call me Blackberry Kin. And I am a solo game developer. And today I'm here to talk about my experience doing that. Just completely self-made. And I want to talk about the project that I've been working on as well. So let's get started. So who am I? Well, my name is Joey. I'm a self-made game designer and game design teacher from the United States. And I'm working on an adventure game called Chiaroscuro. And Chiaroscuro, I'll talk about this project in the next slide, but this project was successfully funded back on Kickstarter in October of 2020. So just over 3 years ago, this project was successfully funded on Kickstarter. And I've been working on this project for a long time. I'll get to that in a little bit. But I've also been working on this project mostly solo. So like that means I've done like I'm mostly an artist, but I've learned how to code. I've learned how to like animate as well. I've also learned how to do project management and production and marketing, and also just a bunch of other things related to like how to run a business and a game studio. So I've had to learn that along the way. That's been tricky, but I'll talk about that as I go with this presentation. So what is Chiaroscuro? What's this game that I'm talking about? So this project has been in development for almost 4 years at this point. Come January of 2024, so January next year. And pretty much the whole basis of the game, it's you play as this character named Rose. She's a swordswoman, and she's lost all of her memories. And the goal is to solve the mystery behind a memory loss catastrophe. So you're not the only person that's lost your memories. Over 95% of this world's population has lost their memories in some way, shape, or form. And so yeah, this game is in this game you can bend different elements. And there's a bunch of different elements that you can bend with different spells for each element. And you pretty much have to explore this world that has this lost history based around it. And this game's pretty much inspired by the games that I played growing up, such as like Cave Story, Hollow Knight, Undertale, Limbo, and Pokemon. I would say like the best description of this game I can kind of give is it's got like the story structure and stuff is like Cave Story. It's got like similar character design and like level design to like Hollow Knight. It's got similar like appeal and style similar to like Undertale and Limbo. And I would say the enemy design is a lot like Pokemon. And also just like the bending of the different elements and how they interact is also a lot like Pokemon. So this game is pretty much just a blend of all of my favorite games put into one. And this is also, I should mention, my first project. Now, it's not the first project I've released. I've released a few other various demos in the 4 years that I've been working on this project. But even though it's the first project I've ever started, it's still in development. And I intend to keep it that way for a little bit. And I'll talk about that in a few slides as well. But pretty much I'm taking the long road to this one. And I want to talk about what that's been like so far. So 4 years, that's nuts. How does anyone have like the kind of commitments to this kind of project? Well, Chiaroscuro's development timeline, it's not been like consistent as I was in college for a good majority of this time. So for a decent chunk of this, I was having to also just balance like my studies and making sure I got a degree. So like for example, I started my project in January of 2020. This was a little bit before COVID, and the game looked like this kind of. It was just like it's a lot worse. It's not as good as what this looks like, obviously. But I ended up releasing a pre-alpha demo in August. So it took me about 7-8 months to really get the hang of what I was working with. Because I was a game design student at the time, and I had been studying like how to do it, but I didn't really know how I wanted to execute it. I had a bunch of ideas that I wanted to go with, but I didn't know like what I wanted to go with, if that makes sense. So anyways, yeah, I went with the pre-alpha demo in August of 2020. After that, a few months later, like I had a decent fan base at that point, and I decided that I wanted to run a Kickstarter campaign for the game because obviously I'm a college student, like I didn't have any money, and I wanted to continue working on this project, and I had built myself up a pretty decent project that I had wanted to go work with. And the project got funded, and I was like, well, you know what? This project that's over here on the left definitely needs some work. Like it's like I have the funds to be able to make this project into something so much better now, but I need to take the time to work that in. And I ended up having to rework a ton of the systems that I had done because obviously when you're working on your first project, there's a ton of stuff that you're going to do wrong, and I did a lot of stuff wrong. So pretty much what I did was I spent the better half of like my time between like the Kickstarter and my college graduation pretty much just restructuring what I had done for the game. So I spent about a year and a half pretty much restructuring what I had previously built to be able to withstand like a longer term development cycle. I also just made things easier for me to do over a period of time. So like I made, I'll talk about that in a little bit, but I made things pretty much just like while before it took me like, I don't know, 4 weeks to make a cutscene. Now I can make a cutscene in like 4 days, So it's like I made systems to be able to speed up that process as well, so I don't feel like that time was wasted. And then obviously I had my college graduation May 2022, so that was a little over a year and a half after the Kickstarter. And at this point, after I graduated college, I was ready to pretty much just spend like half my time working on the game and then half my time making a living and living my life and that kind of stuff. So I've kind of for the since May of 2022, I've pretty much just been doing that, balancing my time as a solo game developer and with my own studio, with also just balancing life and responsibilities and that kind of stuff. So I'll talk about my struggles with that and how I've managed those struggles as well in following slides. And then now in February 2023, so pretty recently, I released a new alpha demo that was pretty much just like an updated version of this one from in the past. That's like way better now. It's got like all the features that the old one did not. The only downside is this one's only for Windows right now. That's just because the Mac that I was working with previously no longer ports to Mac. So I have to get a new Mac before I can port it to Mac. But it will be ported to Mac. But right now, this current demo on the right here is available for Windows. It's for basically chapters 1 and 2 of the game. It's the first 2 to 3 hours of content, and you can play it for completely for free. So if you're interested in checking that out after this talk, give that a check out and wish list it on Steam. And then what I just finished working on actually this morning, it was the beta for chapter 3. So I just finished up working on chapter 3 pretty recently, and I'm about to have that start being beta tested and showcased here sometime pretty soon. And then here during the holiday season, I'm going to begin working on chapter 4 of the game. So that's pretty much what the development timeline looks like now. Now I've been pushing out these chapters at a much faster pace because I spent pretty much all this time beforehand just restructuring the game to get it to be able to withstand a longer term development cycle. So anyways, that's my explanation of 4 years of development. How does that happen? Well, that's pretty much how it goes. And it goes by really quickly. And if you want to do this kind of thing, it seems like a lot, but there's really not that much you even need to do to start solo development if this is something you're interested in doing. But there are a few things that you have to consider if you're going to do solo game development. Firstly, you must be doing this out of pure passion. Like, this is something that, like, if you're not doing this out of passion, if you're doing this like for the money, like, you're just not going to make it far. It's like there are some things that you will only get through just from you wanting to see the outcome of your own work. And that's been a lot of the sole motivation for me finishing my project. Watch out for scope creep as well. I will just talk about this later on in the slides, but scope creep is a huge problem for any producer that's doing anything, not just game design, but film or anything, pretty much anything that has any kind of medium where you're adding stuff over a period of time. And also when you're learning stuff, you want to learn things one thing at a time. I'll get to about this in a second as well. There will be a slide for pretty much each of these, and learn how to lots to learn. There's a lot to learn, and there's a lot to balance when you're trying to do this kind of stuff, not just like when you're like working on your game, but also just like when you're existing as a human being. And so there's lots you have to balance and figure out what you want to prioritize as well and when you want to prioritize it, because everyone's different. And so that being said, you have to also consider your life schedule and your time commitments as well. Just like, what do you do outside? Like, what do you do for fun? Do you want to have stuff that you do for fun? You want to make time for that. So I'll talk about how you do that as well. So how do you start? Well, these are things to consider when beginning, and I really wish that I sat down and like considered all this stuff like when I first started my project like 4 years ago. So the first thing first, like, what kind of game do you want to make? I kind of knew already at this point what kind of game I wanted to make, so that wasn't really an issue. Like, I had already played a bunch of games similar to like I wanted to make a game like Cave Story or a game like Hollow Knight, and kind of like blend all those things together. That's what I ended up making. So that's and what kind of games do I enjoy? Well, I enjoyed like Cave Story, Hollow Knight, Pokemon, Undertale, and I wanted to make a game similar to those. So don't be afraid to stand on the shoulders of giants when you're like first starting off. And also, do you have any skills related to game design already? So like, for me, I was like a graduated high school student at this point. I was an artist. I could do graphic design pretty well. I did a little bit of pixel art. Could not animate for my life. Could not code for my life. I was a pretty good storyteller, and I was good with my time management and project management. But other than that, it was like I was mainly just the ideas guy. I had a lot of ideas. I just couldn't like execute them just because I didn't know how to code. And I'll talk about how I learned how to code as well, like as an artist, because like artists have a hard time learning how to code since it's such a transition. So I'll talk about how I did that as well. And also, you have to think about, do you have the equipment and the software required to even make a game? So like is that even feasible with like what you're doing? Like, do you have a computer? Like, do you have a decent computer? Do you have like for me, I have like an ergonomic like keyboard just because I'm working all the time, and if I didn't have this thing, I would probably have arthritis. So like, just keep in mind whenever you're like getting stuff for like working on a long-term project, you also want to get the equipment that's not going to like ruin your wrists, or you like get yourself some like blue light glasses, so because you're gonna be looking at a screen all the time. So just like get yourself the equipment if you're gonna be doing this like for a long period of time. And now that you've kind of have an idea of what kind of game you want to make, what software you might need or whatever, now you just have to pick an engine. Now let's talk about what kind of engine you might want to pick depending on the kind of game that you are making. Okay, so let's talk about these different kinds of engines. There's engines that are good at 2D game design, there's engines that are good at 3D game design, and then there's engines that are good at both. The ones that I bolded here are ones that are just really good in those particular things. I personally use GameMaker because for 2D game design, I love GameMaker. I think GameMaker is great. There are some flaws to GameMaker, I will say, and there are a lot of things that you can do easier in other game engines. But I personally love it. I think when you're trying to learn something, GameMaker is a great choice for that. So it's super easy for me to learn how to make a game in GameMaker. Again, it took like 6 months. And at that point, like when I had tried GameMaker, I had already tried like almost every other engine. So like the fact that GameMaker was the one that ended up like helping me learn it, like kind of shows that it was already guided in the direction that I needed to go to learn something like that. There's also Godot. Godot is really, really good. It's an it's an engine that's been on for a while, and I have a lot of friends that work in it and can vouch that it is a good game engine. You can do both 2D and 3D in Godot. Same thing with Unity, but I know Unity's had a little bit of controversy recently. Doesn't mean it's not a good game engine to consider. It is a good game engine, and you do have to learn C# for Unity as well. So it's like learning how to code. It's all pretty much the same after a while. GDevelop is an interesting case because GDevelop is a lot less like line by line coding, and it's more like event based coding. So it teaches you the logistics of like how to code and like what that does, like how that interacts with like things like in the game. It's a good foundational, but I don't know how much you could like realistically make with GDevelop over a long period of time. It's great for learning though. And Multimedia Fusion, that's actually the engine that I started on. Like, so I started game design when I was 10. Like my dad signed me up for a camp that I now work for, and like this camp, like I learned how to make games, and I thought it was awesome. I thought it was really cool, like being able to make like a small game. And we worked in Multimedia Fusion too. I thought it was great, and I wanted to learn how to make a game from that. And so I spent pretty much the better part of just like 10 years thinking of ideas for games that I might want to make. That's when I eventually came to GameMaker. But that doesn't mean I've not like messed around with 3D as well. When I got to college, we learned Unreal Engine, and that was the main thing that we learned when I went to college. Unreal Engine's really, really good for the 3D game design. It is a little complex, but every engine is kind of complex in their own way. And again, you can also do 3D game design in Godot and Unity as well, if that's something you might want to try out. But Unreal Engine uses like blueprints for coding for the most part, which is like, it's almost like spider web. Like think about it like it's like what's that called? I can't think of what it's called. It's just the cause and effect, pretty much. I can't think of the word. Blueprinting. Yeah, that's pretty much what it is. Where you can go and say if, and then it branches off to something else, and then branches off to something else. Visual coding. That's what I meant. Anyways, so now that you've kind of picked an engine for what you might want to make, let's talk about how do you want to use the engine. You don't have to read all this. I'm going to talk to you about all this. I just have this on the screen for my sake. But this is what I did to learn how to use my engine when I first started. So, as an artist, I'm like, well, how do I learn how to code? This is what I did. I found 10 tutorials that had to do with things that I wanted to add to Chiaroscuro. I was like, okay, well, what are things that I need to make? I went to GameMaker tutorials and I was like, okay, how do I make a menu? How do I make like level transitions between levels? How do I add in platformer physics? How do I add in music and sound? How do I add in enemies? and how do I add in attacking, et cetera, et cetera. And I pretty much what I would do is I would skim each video and then watch the last 30 seconds of that video to see if that's even something that I'd want to add to my game in the first place. And if it is, and if I think it could work with the other systems that I'm watching, then I'll write it down. Then what I do is I list those tutorials in order of what ones I might need to add like first. So obviously I might need to add in enemies before I add in an attacking system, because I can't attack things if I don't have enemies. Like I need things to attack. So you have to do these things in a particular order as well. So think about that as you're like planning out which tutorials you're going to do. And then lastly, do each tutorial. So figure out what they're doing in the video, why it works, and how this knowledge can be applied to what you already know about the game engine that you're working in. So like, just change like, and what I recommend is like at the end of each tutorial, just like change one thing from the end of that tutorial to pretty much make your project unique. So like, for example, I did like a moving platform tutorial or whatever. And the one thing I changed a few things. I changed like how fast the moving platform was. Then I also changed like the animation on it to make it look like a jellyfish. So it was like a floating jellyfish platform. So it's like those are two things that I changed. They were very minimal, but it taught me a little bit about how to use my engine. And it gave me a little bit of wiggle room to experiment while still like watching a tutorial to see like why things work. And the best advice I could give for someone that's like trying to learn how to code is you don't really need to know like what the code means. It's pretty much as long as you know what the code does, then you're good. You know, you can change stuff about it. So like if you watch a tutorial about like I don't know how to make a level transition or whatever, like how to transition between one level to another, and you're like, okay, well I don't know like what any of this code means when you're writing it. But then if you go in and you're like, okay, I want to I'm going to use this code, maybe make it so that when I press a button, I transition to the menu room. So it's like it goes back and goes back to the main menu. And, you know, you just took the stuff that you applied, that you just learned and just experimented and were able to use it for something else. And that's the whole purpose of this exercise. And so by the end of, and so if something doesn't work out and like you try and figure it out and spend like an hour or two on it, you can't figure it out, you know, just scrap it, you know, don't worry about it. But by the end of the 10th tutorial, the idea is that you should have experimented with enough code to be able to read it better for when you do more tutorials, and you'll be able to better integrate stuff that you've watched from other tutorials. Obviously, tutorials are not the best way to do things because like everyone's going to do something a different way. But the more you watch tutorials, the more you're going to learn how you code, because everyone has their own coding style as well. And once you learn how you code, and you learn those foundations, then you can just copy and paste a lot of old stuff that you used. You know, so that's my that's usually what I tell people when they want to learn how to use their engine. Now that you've kind of started using your engine, you have something, a little product going. These are things that you need to consider when you're making your demo. So now that you've picked an engine, like pretty much you want to plan what kind of game you want to make and what kind of features it will have. Obviously, you've kind of already done this with the different tutorials that you've listed out. But when you're in these early stages of the game's development, don't be afraid to just think outside the box and get creative with it, because like just in general, it's really important to experiment, and especially with like community feedback, because like if a community member says something and they're like, oh, this doesn't like feel right, you might not see it because you've played through the game like over and over and over, but they might see it just because it's a fresh set of eyes. And even that's still an opinion. Granted, like even if that person's not a game designer or whatever, and that opinion is completely baseless, it's still an opinion and still a first impression of your game. So it's something you should still consider, you know, when you're working on your project and when you're like changing things in these early stages of development, because not everything is going to stay. Also, don't implement a ton of features yet. So like just the bare bones of like what makes a core gameplay loop. So that being said, like what makes a core gameplay loop? What is that? What's a gameplay loop? So when you're making a game, you want to build out a gameplay loop for your game. It's pretty much when multiple like elements and parts of your game cause the player to do a sequence of actions continuously over the period of you playing the game. So like let's say in a game you're killing monsters, and then from killing those monsters you get money, and then with that money you can go back and buy upgrades for you to go and kill stronger monsters, which like then you can get more money to buy even stronger upgrades. And that's pretty much what a game loop is. And you have to figure out what that game loop is for your game and if it will be fun. Like that's the main thing. So think about your game loop. Think about what you can also do to make each iteration of that loop interesting. So like that's the boss fights are a good way to do that. Just because they can give each thing that you're doing a way to like test the player as they're going on their game. However, as you're doing all this, you got to keep in mind of a little thing called scope creep. So what's scope creep? I have a whole panel about this. Like, let's talk about it. Do not fall victim to scope creep, even though you will. It'll happen. It happens to everybody. Scope creep, also known as feature creep, refers to when a project's scope continues to increase over time. And this happens to pretty much most developers, including myself. And a good way to avoid scope creep is to make a game design document. And pretty much like what I mean by this is like, and the way scope creep even happens in the first place is you'll be like, oh, I want to figure out a way to transition between like area 1 and area 2. What if this little transition room in between there becomes like a little tiny sub area? And then you design a few enemies for that sub area, and you're like, oh, what if I fleshed out that area and made it a little bit bigger? And it's like, oh, that's not going to add too much more. And then like suddenly you're adding in new mechanics, like new features and stuff that you might need to add in other parts of your game, but you're also just like making that little tiny thing a lot bigger than it should be. And so now you've got a whole new area that you've added to the game. And so while you've made progress on your game, you've added stuff to your game. So you've not actually made progress at all. So that's pretty much what scope creep is and why it's dangerous. And a good way, and like I said, a good way to avoid this is by setting up a game design document and to lay out a development timeline with everything that you have planned. So what is a game design document? What goes into that? There's a bunch of different things you can make game design docs in. I know Nuclino is like one of them, but there's a few different things you can use. Basically anything where it's like, and like you can even use Google Docs if you wanted to and have like link to other docs. But the whole point of like a game dev doc is to have information about your game for you to come back to when you're working on it, so that like you can keep things consistent. Everything should like always come back to this game dev doc when you're working on it. Just because your ideas and stuff are going to change, and you're as a solo developer, you're literally going to forget things that you add. Like one of the things, like for example, I completely forgot at one point in my earlier alpha that I added like falling spikes. And then like once I got around to that point in like remaking that portion of the game, I didn't even add them in because I completely forgot I had even done that like as a feature. Like so, and it's because I didn't document it at the time. So now that I've documented everything, everything's consistent. But when you don't document stuff when you're working on a game, nothing's going to be consistent. So I just recommend like when you're starting your project too, start working on a game dev doc as well. It helps you like organize your ideas. But things you might want to include in a game dev doc are like an overview of your project, gameplay of what it might feel like. What's the gameplay loop like? What's the story? What's happening? Why should I be interested in what's happening in your game? And what could be happening behind the scenes? How are you telling that in the level design? And speaking of that level design, another thing you want to include, like what different levels are in your game? How are they different from one another? Are there puzzles in those levels you have to finish? Are there quests within those levels? What characters exist? And also, what assets are you even going to need? Figure out, and once you figured out all of that, you need to figure out all the assets you might need for the game. You need to make backdrops for these areas. You might need to make like animations for the bosses. Or even just like art for the text interface for when they're talking to one another, or dialogue icons. There's just a lot you need to manage, especially when you're making just even a small game. So that's why all of this is really important to document. And last but not least, the timeline. Timeline, super, super mega important. And I have another full slide about this as well. Let's talk about what it takes to make a game development timeline, or making a project timeline in general. So if you have a large scale project and you're working on it by yourself, design this timeline loosely. The reason I say that is because everyone's schedule changes over time. And I'll elaborate on that in a second, but like what you might want to do is you'll want to list out everything that you need to do to make for that demo. So like you can think of like menus. I might need to add in this system, that system, blah blah blah. Make the list of what you might need to add, and then organize like what order you need to make that stuff in. And then once you've figured out the order you want to make that stuff in, figure out how much time you can fit into that specific week, like on a week-to-week basis, to figure out what you can get done on your project in that specific week. I'd found week-to-week basis is a lot better for scheduling stuff if you're a solo developer, just because your timeline and routine can change, and things will come up when you're working on games. You will run into bugs that you have to fix like right then and there, and it will stop you dead in your tracks. Literally happened to me the other day. So it just happens. It's stuff that will happen. And also you want to plan time for making social media posts as well. So like that's really important. You don't want to I just realized I said marking. What? You want to plan time for social media posts. That's really, really important. If you're not providing exposure for your game, then what's the point in even working on it so much in the first place? And then lastly here, figure out how long it'll take for you to do those things, and then triple the amount of time for each thing. I sound like I'm joking here, but I'm actually dead serious. Triple this stuff, triple the timeline of what you're working on. Because think about it this way: if you're working a job as well, and then you also want to have a life with your friends and family, a third of your time can go into making your game. If you spend a third of your time working, a third of your time with your friends and family, then a third of your time is working on the game. Which at that point, you have to triple that. Because if you're gonna think, oh, I can do all this, do all this in that amount of time. No, you can't. Realistically, you're putting 3 or 4 hours into that part of the day. So it's to actually work on it rather than the 12 you might think you have. So again, triple the amount of time you think that you're going to need for each thing. And that'll probably be more the actual timeline of when you get it done. And also just things to keep in mind. So burnout will happen. And everyone's going to have their way of countering that. For me, of the 4 years that I've been working on this project, probably a good 9 to 10 months of it were just me being burned out, and just obviously think other life things in the way that cause that. Burnout is happening, and everyone has to find their way of countering that. And then also again, like I said, schedules and routines will change over time, and you have to learn how to balance your priorities. So some kind of static sound. I'm not sure what that is. Oh, I don't know. Oh well. Anyways, I heard some sort of static and it threw me off. So you have to balance your priorities out, in real life. So obviously, there's things that you're going to have to work on, in your project, the game. There's some things that are going to take priority over other things, and you're going to have to work on those things in order to get stuff done. And then obviously in real life, there are going to be things in real life that are going to take priority over you working on the game, even relationships or whatever. So you have to keep that in mind as well. And then obviously, again, stay consistent and engage with your community. That's really important. That goes back to using the social media posts. pretty often. And then also just listen to your body. Like if you're staying up like super late and like not working at the times that you're like best working, it like you might want to do something different. It's like just to listen to your body and don't overexert yourself, because ultimately you are the one that is doing all the work for the project. Okay, so where can I even share my stuff in the first place? Make a Discord. Community engagement is extremely important, and share everything that you're doing in this Discord. That's where people will probably want to come see your stuff mostly. Instagram's good for community interaction too, and just showcasing a wide variety of different kinds of media. Same with like Twitter or X. It's great for short posts and teases of like behind the scenes stuff. YouTube is great for like long form content. So I have like extended devlogs that I post on my YouTube about the game and stuff that like stuff that I've been working on for the game. And then TikTok and YouTube Shorts are great for really fast paced content to get people, you know, hooked and interested into your content potentially in the future. And Reddit I have down there at the bottom because like it's good to advertise on Reddit like every so often, but it does have a limited advertising rule, so you don't want to do it super often. And also like people on Reddit are like they're a bit more objective. Like they're not going to see that if you post about your game or whatever, they're not going to see, oh, this game was made by one person. They're going to see, oh, this is a game, and it's not as good as the other games that exist. So like they're not going to keep that in mind when they're talking to stuff about you, about your game. They're going to treat you like anybody else. That being said, though, where can I find funding? Because this be costing money. So there's a few directions you can go with that. You can go with Kickstarter. Only do this once you already have like a solid demo. It's great for community interaction, but the only downside is that one of the downsides is that it can add a lot of extra content to your game, which can also add to scope creep happening. That Kickstarter is the direction that I went, and although I'm really happy that I went with the direction of Kickstarter, I wish I had waited a little bit longer, at least until I like graduated college. But obviously, starting off, you're not going to know exactly what you're doing, so I've kind of just learned this along the way. And this is the whole point of this discussion. There's also, you could also go with a publisher, but I would recommend only doing this once you have a fleshed out game development timeline and you kind of know what you're doing. And also once you have like a polished demo. It's good for if you don't have a lot of time to market your game and you have a lot of time to put into your game. However, you want to watch your deadlines when you're working with a publisher. And you also want to do your research onto which publisher you even want to go with. And lastly, you can take the long road, which you don't have to do one of these. You can do all three. You can do two of them, or you can do only one. For me, I'm kind of doing a little mix of two. I did the Kickstarter a while back, and now from here on, I am taking the long road, which for the most part now, like I still have funds from the Kickstarter that I'm using, but they don't go to me at all. I keep them only for the game. And for the most part, I just fund things out of pocket now for the game. And I kind of take my time with the project. But the main downside of taking your time with a project is that the longer you wait to release your project, the more your wish list conversion rate goes down. A wish list conversion rate pretty much just means how many people will buy your game based on how many people wish list your game. So like usually like a wish list like if you for like 10,000 or for like 1,000 wish lists, you might get like 100 sales. But like the longer you like don't release your game, that 1,000 wish lists might go down to like 80 sales. So just something to keep in mind when you're working on your game for longer periods of time. And then what's it like taking the long road for me? Well, these are things that I have to consider when I'm doing this. So obviously I have to juggle time with jobs and chiaroscuro, which can be really tricky. You know, like outside of this, like I work like 30, 35 hours a week. Then I put about 20 to 25 hours into chiaroscuro. So some weeks I'm working like 60, 70 hours. But also chiaroscuro is my hobby, and you know I love it. I think it's a ton of fun to do. A lot of the time, there's some times where I'm like, oh, this is frustrating, but that comes with everything, and anything that you're going to treat like a job. And that being said, I also have to make time for my friends and my family as well, which is something that's also been tricky, and I've had to find time to balance. But I've also made it work by using those times as like my break periods. And also just like balancing priorities based on the time of day can be tough depending on the week. Like, obviously you have to find your own schedule, what works best for you. For me, I found that I work best like right when I wake up. Um, and but sometimes like I might not be able to have time to do stuff in the morning. So like then I'll have to get stuff done at night, and I might want to spend that nighttime stuff working on animations because I can do that really mindlessly and I don't have to use my brain. So balancing those priorities based on the time of day can be tough as well. And game development, like I said, extremely inconsistent. You're gonna run into bugs all the time. Like the other day, I literally ran into a bug that I was like, I have to spend all day fixing this. This is perfect. So you're gonna run into stuff like that. The upsides of taking the long road, however, is that I have a community who's willing to stick with me throughout my journey, and that is all I could really ask for with this. I'm really grateful for the people that like follow me and like help me like give me feedback with my game. I also don't have the time to test my game, so like they're the ones that test my game and help me find bugs, which I really appreciate. My game's only as polished as it is because of them. And my project, that also means my project can only get more and more polished from here if I have that kind of support. And I can also release the game's beta in chapters now. So now I've released chapter 3 as a beta, but now I can release these chapters like over the course of the following months. So in the next few months, I'll be able to release a beta for my chapter 4, and then a beta for chapter 5. And the upside of this is that for each beta testing phase, even though it is taking a little bit more of the long road, it's going to allow the game to be more polished by the end. And when I finally have a full project, there will be a lot less bugs that I'll even have to manage. Rather than like if I were to just bake the entire game and then fix all the bugs, that would actually suck. So just trying to do things that like in a way that's going to make my mental health, sane. And like I said, that way I don't have too much stress about super hard deadlines, since my mental health is the driving force of this project. And so, is there anything else you'd like to tell me before I start? Or is there anything else you'd like? Pretend you're saying this to me. Anything that you'd like for me to tell you before I start? Yes. So like I said, stand on these shoulders of giants. So don't be afraid to use mechanics that are in other games. It's just about how you execute and blend those mechanics that will make your game stand out in the end. That's really important. Don't be afraid to try stuff that people have already tried. Just try and find a way to make it a little different. Or blend something between two games that might be something new. And make a game that you want to play. A project like that you find enjoyable is really important, because you're going to be play testing that game for hundreds and thousands of hours. So make sure you enjoy the game that you're working on. And also take care of yourself. The path of a solo developer can be a stressful and lonely one if you let it be. So give yourself breaks and find what works for you. And also, I don't mention this here, but find a community of people that are also doing stuff similar to you, because it's much easier to be able to share your project and relate with the things that you might find tricky along the way. So anyways, thanks for sticking around, and I hope you enjoyed my talk. Do you guys have any? I'm now opening the floor to any questions that you may have.
Thank you so much, Joy. It was an amazing conference. By the way, I want to put this comment up on the screen from Charlie Fernandez. He says, amazing conference. Thanks, Joy. Balancing work, life, and game dev stuff. Me and my game dev partner are still getting the hang of things. What is the first real blocker you faced in early development? That's the question from Charlie. Well,
I would say the first issue that I found in early development goes back to scope creep. It goes to the point where I was saying, like, pretty much, like, let me go back to the part where I was pretty much just saying I had to restructure like my whole game. Like, let me go to that timeline. Pretty much my main issue that I found was that by this time, like by the time I did the Kickstarter and I had finished like a good demo for this and got this project funded, I knew it could become this, but I knew it could only really become this if I restructured a lot of what I was already working on. So that was, I would say, the major challenge, is just restructuring a lot of the stuff that I did wrong. And that's why, and stuff that I ended up changing. And that's why I recommend, like, you make a game development document, just so that whenever you, like, whatever you end up making to your game, it stays consistent. and also again, just take your time with it too. Though it's one of those things that like you'll know if it's out of passion if you're doing it for fun. Is the best
Uh,
advice I can give.
Also, Charlie, no, Diego Lopez asks here, and if we can please put this one on the screen, how big a demo should be.
A demo should be, I don't know, it can be a short demo. Like I think anything that's like 30 minutes of playtime or more like can be considered like a decent demo. I mean, even if it's even if it's like something like small, like if it has the potential to have more added on to it, that's what will make it like a good demo or not. Yeah, pretty
Okay.
much if people can see if there's like more to come.
Now, Alberto says, if we can put this comment up on the screen, great conference. How much do you believe organic growth, specifically by your Discord community, impacted your sales at the end of the day?
Let's see, how much do you believe organic growth specifically? That's an interesting question, and that's actually something that I'm interested in finding out once I get the chance to, because I've not really Skira yet. I'm waiting to do that until Skira is a really polished and decent sized project. So I want to see at the end of the day like how much word of mouth can do. I've heard word of mouth is like one of the best ways to um, to market your game. And if you're doing that like through your community, like through yourself, and you're being transparent, like this is me, this is not some corporate entity trying to make a game, like this is something out of pure passion. If your community understands that, they're going to be more and more willing to do that kind of thing. So I am interested to see like how much word of mouth can do once I actually release the game.
And one last question, out of time. I know that there's probably more questions, but we have to keep tight to the schedule. If anyone has any more questions, please feel free to leave them down on our Discord server, and we'll make sure to have them reach Joy and any of the people giving conferences today and tomorrow. So here, Jeff Ramos says, I have a question. If we can put that one on the screen also. Uh, I, I have a question. What's the key for a successful Kickstarter campaign?
Hmm. I would say the order in which you put stuff in that campaign is the most important thing. People are not gonna read through a Kickstarter campaign all the way through and usually people only read the first 20% of a Kickstarter campaign. So put everything you want people to see near the top. It's like the best advice I can give.
Awesome. Great. Very well. Then thanks, Joy, for joining us and for sharing your knowledge, your experience, and all of your passion, because we know that you're such a passionate developer. It just goes through, and we wish you all of the best with Chiaroscuro and whatever other project you get involved in. And
Thank
I'm
you
going
so
to switch
much.
to Spanish now. Muchísimas gracias a las personas que se han conectado y que se quedaron hasta acá. En unos minutos vamos a continuar con gameplay de algunos de los juegos nominados para la ExpoVid, para los Beat Awards 2023, que recuerden van a llevarse a cabo el día de mañana a partir de las 6:30 p.m. Esperamos que nos puedan acompañar allá físicamente en el auditorio EMU, en AFZ, el American Free Zone, y si no, recuerden conectarse a través de el Facebook o YouTube de ExpoVid. Agradecemos a Pinto con Videojuegos, nuestro media partner, quien también transmite en su YouTube esta edición de ExpoVid 2023, a la Universidad Creativa por patrocinarnos, y nos vemos en la siguiente transmisión. Quédense, todo el día tenemos contenido, quédense cerquita, nos vemos.